In 2006, a German chemist named Dietmar Glindemann from Leipzig University conducted an experiment that you can replicate right now without even leaving your chair. Take any copper coin, an old penny or any small change containing copper will do perfectly. Rub it between your palms for about 10 or 15 seconds. Now, slowly bring your hands to your face and take a breath. Do you smell it? That distinct, sharp, metallic tang that everyone has known since early childhood. Most of us were taught to think of this as the smell of metal. But Glindemann and his team proved something quite different, publishing their findings in the journal Angewandte Chemie. The truth is that no metal on Earth has a smell. None at all. Not iron, not copper, not zinc, not tin. Metals are crystalline lattices with zero volatility at room temperature. They have nothing to release into the air. Physically, they cannot have an odor. What you are actually smelling on your palms is the product of your own skin breaking down. Within a fraction of a second, copper ions catalyze a reaction with the lipid molecules on the surface of your epidermis, breaking them down into volatile carbonyl compounds. Specifically, a molecule called 1-octene-3-1 is responsible for that metallic scent. Your brain registers this molecule and helpfully labels the sensation with the familiar tag, metal. But in reality, you are smelling the microscopic destruction of your own flesh. A single touch, 1 second of contact, and your skin has already become the raw material for a chemical reaction you didn't ask for and cannot control. Copper does not wait for permission. It doesn't need an invitation. It acts silently, instantly, and inevitably. And this is perhaps the most harmless thing element number 29 is capable of. Even as you listen to this, on every copper surface in your home, an invisible slaughter is taking place. On a doorknob, a water tap, or that old coin in a drawer, copper ions are hunting.
They find a bacterial cell, latch onto the sulfur-containing proteins on its membrane, and pierce the shell like a can opener through a tin can. A flood of foreign ions rushes into the cell, and its internal balance is obliterated. But that is only the first act. Once inside, the copper generates hydroxyl radicals, reactive oxygen species that shred the bacteria's DNA into useless pieces. The cell's repair mechanisms are overwhelmed instantly. It cannot recover, it cannot divide, and it cannot pass on genetic information. It simply collapses and ceases to exist. Even the most dangerous superbugs, like MRSA, which resist the most advanced antibiotics, can survive on stainless steel for weeks. On a copper surface, they are dead within 90 minutes. A piece of metal in your pocket does what the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry often struggles to achieve. Before we continue exploring why this metal is older than the sun and how it built our civilization, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It's a simple gesture, but it's the catalyst that allows us to keep digging into these deep stories. Copper is not just the cheap, orange wire from a school textbook. It is a chemical predator, a killer of the invisible, the skeleton of our technology, and a quantum enigma. All of this is contained within a single element, an element that existed billions of years before our sun was born. Without it, you would suffocate even in an oxygen-rich room. It launched the first technological revolution in human history, toppled empires, survived 5 millennia of war, and still hides physics within its structure that the world's greatest minds have been unable to fully decode for nearly 40 years. To understand this, we must go back to the very beginning. Not to the birth of humanity, but to the darkness of deep space. No atom of copper existing on our planet was created here.
Every milligram of it is imported, the result of a massive, cataclysmic explosion in a distant part of the galaxy, involving temperatures in the billions of degrees. To assemble the nucleus of a copper atom, to pack 29 protons and 34 neutrons into one compact core, you need conditions that have never existed on Earth. Inside ordinary stars like our Sun, a thermonuclear conveyor belt is at work. Hydrogen fuses into helium, helium into carbon, carbon into oxygen, and oxygen into silicon. Every step releases energy, which is why a star shines. This process continues for billions of years, building a layered, onion-like structure. But in the very center, an iron core begins to form. Iron is element number 26, and this is where the conveyor belt stops. Iron has the highest binding energy per nucleon of any element in the periodic table. This means that further fusion, trying to create anything heavier than iron, no longer releases energy, it consumes it. The star cannot create copper and continue to shine. Iron is an energy dead end. It is a wall. For an ordinary star, this is the end of the road. To break through this wall and reach element number 29, you need a catastrophe. When a massive star, 10 or 20 times heavier than our Sun, exhausts its fuel, its iron core reaches a critical point known as the Chandrasekhar limit. At this moment, the core collapses in a fraction of a second. The outer layers of the star crash inward at speeds up to 70,000 kilometers per second, bounce off the incompressible neutron core, and explode into space as a supernova. In this hellish environment, the temperature spikes to 10 billion degrees. The pressure reaches trillions of atmospheres. The flow of neutrons is so dense that atomic nuclei capture them in clusters, dozens at a time, within milliseconds. This is the R process, or rapid neutron capture. Nuclei rapidly gain mass and transform into new, heavier elements. Silicon becomes iron. Iron becomes cobalt. Cobalt becomes nickel, and nickel becomes copper. The entire cycle happens in seconds. A copper atom is assembled in the time it takes you to blink. There is also a second, slower path called the S process, which occurs in red giants, stars in the late stages of their lives. Here, the neutron flux is weaker, and nuclei capture neutrons one by one over thousands of years. The result is the same: copper. But whether born in a violent explosion or a slow, dying fade, radioisotope analysis of meteorites, the remnants of the original disk from which our solar system formed, shows that the copper in our neighborhood was synthesized 5 to 8 billion years ago. Our Sun is only 4.5 billion years old. Copper is significantly older. It is older than our star, our planet, our oceans, and our mountains. Every gram of copper in your phone charger or your home's plumbing is the ash of a star that lived and died long before our Sun ever ignited. When the Earth formed, copper was already part of the dust. As the molten young planet sorted its elements by density, most of the heavy metals like iron and nickel sank into the core. Some copper, however, remained in the crust, settling into sulfide minerals like chalcopyrite or carbonate minerals like malachite and azurite. These bright green and blue stones, strikingly different from the grey granite around them, eventually caught the eye of a species that was just learning to walk upright. And that was when a completely different story began. History textbooks often treat the Copper Age as a brief, insignificant footstool between the primitive Stone Age and the glorious Bronze Age. They paint a picture of half-naked nomads stumbling upon a shiny rock, hitting it with another rock, and creating a crude, soft knife. We are taught that it was a primitive era for primitive people. But this is more than just a simplification. It is a systematic failure of our collective memory. The Copper Age was the first true technological singularity in the history of our species. It was the moment humanity stopped being a passive observer of nature's gifts and became its sculptor. The data gathered from archaeology and paleometallurgy over the last 30 years proves this beyond any doubt. On September 19, 1991, two German hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, were trekking through the Ötztal Alps on the border between Austria and Italy. At an altitude of 3,210 meters, they spotted something protruding from the melting ice of a glacier. At first, they thought it was a discarded piece of trash or perhaps a modern mountaineer who had met an unfortunate end a few decades prior. But as the ice gave way, they revealed a body. This was Ötzi, the Iceman. When the radiocarbon dating results came back, the scientific world stood still. This man had died 5,300 years ago, more than 2 millennia before the founding of Rome. He was perfectly preserved by the ice, along with his clothing made of goat skin and bear fur, his flint knife, and a quiver of arrows. But the item that rewrote history was his axe. It was a masterpiece of ancient engineering. When specialists from the University of Rome performed a spectral analysis on the blade, it sparked a quiet scientific scandal. The copper in that axe was 99.7% pure. To put that into perspective, the industrial production of copper at that level of purity only became a stable reality in the 19th century with the advent of electrolytic refining. Yet here was a man from the Neolithic period walking through the Alps with an object that, by metallurgical standards, was equivalent to early industrial products. Further isotope analysis added another layer to the mystery. The copper in Ötzi's axe had been smelted from ore mined in southern Tuscany, hundreds of kilometers away from where his body was found. This simple fact shatters our image of the primitive Copper Age.
It tells us that 5,000 years ago, there were already complex international trade networks. There was specialization. One group of people dug the ore, another smelted it, a third forged the tools, and a fourth transported them across treacherous mountain passes. This wasn't caveman luck. It was an economic system with a clear division of labor. Ötzi was not an anomaly. In Serbia, at a site called Belivod, archaeologists discovered traces of copper smelting dating back 7,000 years. 5 millennia before the first Egyptian pyramid, people in the Balkans were building furnaces that could consistently maintain a temperature above 1,084 degrees Celsius, the melting point of copper. They knew how to enrich the ore, how to manage the roasting process, and how to separate the slag from the pure metal. This knowledge was passed down through generations, from master to apprentice, forming a secret language of fire and stone. Before humans invented the wheel, before they domesticated the horse, before they even knew the potter's wheel, they were already working with copper. It began with cold forging, simply hitting a nugget of native copper with a stone to shape it. Native copper is one of the few metals found in nature in its pure form, appearing as reddish chunks that can be picked up off the ground. Then they learned that heating the metal made it softer, more obedient. Then came the realization that they could melt it entirely and pour it into clay molds. Every step took centuries, sometimes millennia of trial, error, and accidental genius. The result changed everything. A stone tool is limited by its geology. You work with what nature gives you, a flake of flint, a shard of obsidian. The shape is dictated by the material. But copper obeyed the human mind. If you wanted a fish hook, you cast a hook. If you wanted a chisel, you cast a chisel. The material became an extension of human thought rather than an obstacle to it. This was a civilizational shift of a magnitude we still haven't fully grasped. But copper had a weakness. On its own, it was relatively soft. It could hold an edge, but not for long. It would bend under heavy use. Then, someone, somewhere, we don't know exactly who or where, added a small amount of tin to the molten copper, about 10 to 12%. The result was bronze. This alloy was exponentially harder than pure copper. It held a sharp edge, it didn't bend during impact, and it could be cast into incredibly complex shapes. This discovery divided humanity into those who had access to bronze and those who did not.
The former built empires, the latter became their subjects. The search for copper led humanity to the island of Cyprus. The very name, quote, 3 is derived from the Latin cyprium, meaning underscore underscore quote underscore 4 underscore underscore. The island was packed with copper ore, chalcopyrite and malachite. The veins ran right to the surface. Control of Cyprus was the ultimate prize for every great power of the Eastern Mediterranean: the Egyptians, the Hittites, the Mycenaean Greeks, and the Phoenicians. Cyprus wasn't a resort, it was an arsenal. Whoever controlled the copper controlled the production of weapons. But bronze required tin, and tin was a geological rarity. It is distributed across the planet with extreme unevenness. The main sources were far away: Cornwall in England, Central Asia, and the mountains of Afghanistan. Trade routes stretched for thousands of kilometers over sea and land. There were maritime caravans, guarded land convoys, and bustling transshipment points. 1,500 years before Christ, there was a global logistical network connecting the British Isles to the Middle East. It was a fragile, interconnected system of mutual dependence. Around 1200 BC, this system collapsed. The reasons are a subject of fierce debate among historians. The mysterious Sea Peoples, devastating droughts recorded in paleoclimatic data, earthquakes or internal rebellions. Most likely, it was all of them at once, a cascading perfect storm. The result was absolute. The Hittite Empire, which controlled much of Anatolia and northern Syria, vanished entirely, wiped from the map.
Mycenaean Greece plunged into a dark age for 400 years. Literacy was forgotten, cities were abandoned, and the population plummeted. Egypt was weakened beyond recognition. Historian Eric Klein called this 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. At the heart of this catastrophe was the severing of the copper and tin trade. When the nervous system of the ancient world was cut, the body died. Civilizations that depended on bronze shattered like glass. But copper didn't leave the stage. It simply changed masters. Then came Rome. The Roman Republic, and later the Empire, consumed copper on a scale that defies imagination. In the Rio Tinto region of modern-day Spain, the Romans transformed the landscape into a massive industrial zone. Thousands of slaves, prisoners of war, and debtors worked in subterranean tunnels, hacking away at copper and silver ore. The volume of mining was so immense that acidic runoff turned the local river a blood-red color, a color it retains to this day, 2,000 years later. The geochemical footprint of Roman copper production is so massive that it can be detected in the ice cores of Greenland. The atmospheric pollution caused by Roman smelting left a measurable layer of copper and lead in the polar ice, 4,000 kilometers away from the mines. This is documented data published in the journal Science. Rome was the first to leave its chemical signature on the planet's atmosphere, 1,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. But Rome also used copper for a more insidious purpose: financial manipulation. The Roman As, the basic bronze coin, originally weighed 1 Roman pound, about 327 grams. It was a heavy, honest piece of metal. But as the Punic Wars drained the treasury, the state began to shrink the coin. They cut it down to an ounce, then even less. This was inflation sealed in metal. The state reduced the weight of the coin while keeping the nominal value, effectively stealing from its own citizens. Copper became the first tool of systematic financial deception long before the advent of central banks and paper money. It was the same scheme we see today, but instead of a printing press, they used a mint, and instead of paper, they used bronze. When Rome eventually fell, copper production in Europe collapsed. It wouldn't recover for centuries. The Middle Ages were, among other things, an era of acute copper deficiency. But the metal was merely dormant. waiting for a new era of expansion. It would take the age of discovery and the rise of the great Swedish mines like Falun to restart the engines. In Sweden, the Great Copper Mountain at Falun operated from the 10th century until 1992. For nearly 1,000 years, it fueled the Swedish military machine. During the 30 Years' War, King Gustavus Adolphus fought his battles on copper money. Sweden even minted coins made of pure copper that weighed up to 20 kilograms. Imagine trying to go to the market with a coin the size of a paving stone. But as humanity moved toward the modern era, copper began to reveal properties that went far beyond tools and currency. It revealed itself as a protector. In 1832, Paris was being strangled by cholera. The disease was cutting down thousands of people a week. Doctors were powerless. At the time, the germ theory of disease didn't exist. No one knew what a bacterium was. Yet, a French physician named Victor Berck began to notice a pattern that didn't fit any existing model. He visited the workshops of copper workers, jewelers, engravers, and foundrymen. He noticed that those who were in daily, physical contact with copper simply didn't get sick. Berck collected statistics through 3 consecutive epidemics. His findings were staggering. The incidence of cholera among copper workers was many times lower than in the general population. He presented his report to the Paris Academy of Sciences, but since no one could explain why it worked, the discovery was shelved. The cholera vibrio wouldn't be identified until 1883. It would take more than 150 years for modern science to pull Berck's discovery off the shelf and analyze it with the tools of 21st century molecular biology. We now know that copper's antimicrobial power is a result of the ___9___. Even a tiny concentration of copper ions is total annihilation for most pathogens. It is a silent, microscopic war that never ends. If you look at the Statue of Liberty standing in New York Harbor, you are looking at 139 years of copper's self-defense. Her skin is only 2.4 millimeters thick, thinner than 2 coins stacked together. Originally, she was a bright reddish gold, but she quickly turned green. This is patina, a layer of copper carbonate that forms on the surface. It isn't decay, it is a shield. The patina is so dense and stable that it prevents oxygen and moisture from reaching the metal underneath. Copper builds its own armor out of its own corrosion. Steel would rot in a century. Aluminum would crumble, but copper remains. Think about the wires buried under the streets of your city, the cables lying on the floor of the Atlantic, and the microscopic traces of copper in the processor of the device you are using right now. We think we have mastered this metal, that we are the ones who dig it up and pull it into wires. But in the grand scale of geological time, the only scale that matters the stone and metal, the perspective shifts. At the very end of this respiratory chain sits a massive protein complex called cytochrome C oxidase. At its heart, it holds atoms of copper. Without these specific atoms, your cells could not process oxygen. You would suffocate from the inside out, even if your lungs were full of air. You are, in a very literal sense, a copper-powered organism. But copper's role in our biology is a double-edged sword. Your body requires a tiny amount, barely a few milligrams, yet the corridor of safety is as narrow as a razor's edge. Step too far to the left and you encounter Menkes disease. This is a genetic defect that prevents the body from absorbing copper from food. The result is a slow, agonizing breakdown of the nervous system, brittle bones, and failing blood vessels. Without the red metal, the body's architecture simply loses its integrity. Step too far to the right, and you find Wilson's disease. Here, the body fails to export excess copper. It begins to accumulate in the liver, the brain, and the eyes. It manifests as tremors, psychoses, and a haunting diagnostic sign known as the Kaiser-Fleischer ring, a shimmering,
greenish-brown deposit of copper around the iris of the eye. It is a visible mark of the metal claiming the person from within. We exist in a state of perpetual balance, dancing on a copper wire between two different types of death. But while we humans, and all vertebrates, have chosen iron to carry our oxygen, giving our blood its familiar red hue, evolution has another, stranger design. If you look into the depths of the ocean, you will find a different world. Octopuses, squids, and crustaceans do not have red blood. They have blue blood. Not a pale, watery blue, but a deep, intense cobalt. This is because they do not use hemoglobin, they use hemocyanin. Instead of iron at the center of the protein, they use 2 atoms of copper. Hemocyanin is not an inferior alternative to our iron-based blood. In the freezing, low-oxygen environments of the deep sea, copper-based blood is actually superior. It transports oxygen more efficiently at temperatures near freezing, where iron would struggle. There are creatures on this planet that have functioned on a copper-driven biological drive for hundreds of millions of years. Among them is the horseshoe crab, a living fossil that has survived all 5 mass extinctions. Their blue, copper-rich blood contains a unique type of cell called an amoebocyte. When these cells encounter even a trace amount of bacterial toxins, they instantly coagulate, forming a gel that seals off the threat. Today, this ancient copper-based defense system is the gold standard for modern medicine. Every vaccine, every surgical implant, and every intravenous drug produced in the world is tested using the blood of horseshoe crabs. This is the LAL test. A single liter of this blue, copper-laden blood is worth $15,000. We owe the safety of our most advanced medical procedures to a biological design that predates the dinosaurs, built on the unique chemistry of element number 29. But let us move from the liquid of life to the solid of the digital age. We think of copper primarily as a conductor, the orange wire that brings electricity to our homes. But the physics of how copper moves energy is a quantum paradox that shatters our common sense. When you flip a light switch, the bulb glows almost instantly. The electrical signal travels through the copper wire at about 200,000 kilometers per second, roughly 2/3 the speed of light. It is easy to imagine that the electrons inside the wire are racing along at these incredible speeds, like water in a high-pressure hose. But the reality is far more bizarre. The actual drift speed of electrons in a standard household wire is about a fraction of a millimeter per second. An electron in your wall moves slower than a snail, slower than the growth of your fingernails. How can the light turn on instantly if the electrons are barely moving? The answer lies in the quantum structure of the copper atom. Copper has 29 electrons, and it breaks the standard rules of chemistry to achieve a state of maximum stability. It leaves a single electron in its outermost shell, weakly bound to the nucleus. In a piece of copper, trillions upon trillions of these lonely electrons are shared among all the atoms, creating what physicists call an electron gas. When you flip that switch, you aren't waiting for an electron to travel from the wall to the bulb. Instead, you are creating an electromagnetic wave that ripples through the electron gas. It is like a row of falling dominoes. The individual domino only moves a few inches, but the wave of the fall travels across the room in a heartbeat. Copper is the __1_7_ that guides this electromagnetic field. We have built a global civilization on the ability of this specific metal to allow waves of energy to glide across the planet with minimal resistance. But there is a final, even deeper secret hidden in copper's crystalline lattice, one that has taunted the greatest minds in physics for nearly 40 years. In 1986, at an IBM laboratory in Zurich, 2 physicists named Georg Bednorz and Alex Müller discovered something that shouldn't exist: high-temperature superconductivity. Superconductivity is the holy grail of energy. It is a state where a material has zero electrical resistance. If you start a current in a superconducting loop, it will flow forever without losing a single watt of power. For decades, we believed this was only possible at temperatures near absolute zero, the temperature of deep space. But Bednords and Muller found that a specific type of ceramic containing copper and oxygen, called a cuprate, could become a superconductor at much higher temperatures. This discovery was an earthquake in the scientific world.
It led to the Woodstock of physics in 1987, where thousands of scientists crammed into a New York ballroom until 3 a.m. to discuss how a copper-based ceramic could break the known laws of physics. Today, we still don't fully understand why copper enables this. We know it happens in the thin planes of copper and oxygen atoms within the material, but the underlying quantum mechanism remains a mystery. If we ever unlock this secret, if we can create a copper-based superconductor that works at room temperature, it will be the end of the world as we know it. We could have trains that float on magnetic fields, power lines that never lose energy, and computers that never get hot. We are standing on the edge of a new era, and once again, the red metal is the key. But as we look at our high-tech, copper-wrapped world, we must remember the cost. We have extracted 700 million tons of this metal from the Earth. It is in our blood, it is in our walls, and it is on the floor of our oceans. It has been used to build the cables that connect our continents and the shells that have destroyed our cities. Copper is the silent witness to every phone call, every internet stream, and every war of the modern age. It is a metal that doesn't just conduct electricity, it conducts human history itself. It is the predator on our doorknobs, the blue ghost in the veins of an octopus, and the quantum weaver of our digital reality. We have spent 7,000 years learning to use it, yet we are only beginning to understand what it truly is. Copper is not just an element, it is a fundamental pillar of our existence, a red line running through the story of life on Earth. While we admire the blue blood of the deep sea and the quantum mysteries of the laboratory, we must confront the reality that copper is also a metal of absolute violence. It is a strategic resource on the level of oil, and this is not an exaggeration. For centuries, the course of human conflict has been dictated by the availability of this red metal. If you look at a modern cartridge, you see a brass casing. Brass is an alloy, roughly 70% copper and 30% zinc. This specific combination was the engine of both world wars. The choice of brass wasn't aesthetic. It was a masterpiece of ballistic engineering. Brass is uniquely elastic. During the explosion of the propellant, the casing expands to seal the chamber of the gun, preventing deadly gases from escaping backward. Then, a fraction of a second later, it shrinks just enough to allow the casing to be ejected smoothly. Every bullet fired in the trenches of the Somme, every shell launched from the deck of a battleship, was a copper-powered event. During World War I, Germany found itself strangled by a British naval blockade. Deprived of the copper mines of the Americas and Africa, the German war machine began to starve. By 1915, the government began to confiscate copper from its own citizens. Kitchen pots, doorknobs, and even the massive bells of ancient cathedrals were torn down and melted into shell casings. They were literally turning their cultural heritage into ammunition. In World War II, the situation was even more desperate. In 1943, the United States stopped minting copper cents and switched to zinc-coated steel. Every available ounce of copper was redirected to the front, not just for bullets, but for the intricate wiring of radio stations, the motors of tanks, and the contacts of early radar systems. Without copper, a modern army is blind, deaf, and paralyzed. But long before the era of gunpowder and radio, copper had already decided the fate of the seas. In 1761, the British Navy performed a secret experiment on a frigate named the HMS Alarm. They covered the wooden hull below the waterline with thin sheets of copper. It was an expensive, radical idea,
But the results were so profound that they changed naval warfare forever. In the age of sail, the greatest enemy of a ship wasn't the enemy's cannon. It was the teredo navalis, a shipworm that ate through wooden hulls, and the barnacles that grew so thick they slowed ships to a crawl. A copper-bottomed ship stayed clean. The toxic ions released by the copper prevented any marine life from latching on. This gave the British a speed advantage of 1 or 2 knots. In a naval battle, that is the difference between life and death. By 1780, the entire British line of battle was copper-sheathed. Britain's global naval supremacy was, quite literally, plated in copper. The phrase copper-bottomed entered the English language as a synonym for something absolutely reliable and certain. However, the most significant shift in copper's biography happened in 1858. An American entrepreneur named Cyrus Field embarked on a project that most of his contemporaries considered to be madness. He wanted to stretch a copper telegraph cable across the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, connecting Europe and America. It was a distance of over 3,000 kilometers, at depths of up to 4 kilometers. The core of this cable was a 7-strand copper wire, surrounded by layers of gutta-percha insulation and steel armor. After multiple failures, where the cable snapped and vanished into the abyss, the connection was finally established on August 5, 1858. Queen Victoria sent a message of greeting to President Buchanan. The transmission took 16.5 hours, but the world had changed. Information that previously took 10 to 14 days to cross the ocean on a steamship now moved in minutes. That thin copper thread lying in the darkness of the Atlantic floor was the birth of our global nervous system. Every email, every phone call, and every digital stream we send today is the direct descendant of that original copper wire. We live in a, quote, 22 world because we have wrapped our planet in a web of red metal. But as we look at the modern world, we find ourselves caught in a profound and dark irony. We are currently attempting a, quote, _23_ to save the planet from a climate catastrophe. We want electric vehicles, wind turbines, and solar farms. But these technologies are voracious for copper. A traditional car contains about 20 kilograms of copper. An electric vehicle requires over 80. A single large wind turbine needs several tons of copper for its generator and cabling. This demand has turned copper into the quote, _24__. And like oil, its extraction comes at a devastating human and environmental cost. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, home to some of the world's richest copper and cobalt deposits, the mining industry is a landscape of shadows. Much of the copper is extracted in artisanal mines, hand-dug pits where thousands of people, including children, work in conditions that the United Nations has classified as modern-day slavery. The money from this copper fuels local armed groups and sustains civil wars that have claimed millions of lives over the last 30 years. We are attempting to build a clean future on the back of a deeply dirty supply chain. This is the circular trap of the 21st century. The metal required to save our atmosphere is being dug out of the ground at the cost of our humanity. And then there is the environmental reality. In Chile, the world's largest copper producer, the Escondida mine is a hole in the desert so vast it can be seen from space. To produce 1 ton of copper, hundreds of tons of rock must be pulverized, treated with acid, and washed with millions of liters of water in one of the driest places on Earth. We are trading one form of ecological destruction for another, and we have no other choice. There is no substitute for copper. Aluminum is a poor conductor that creates fire hazards. Silver is too expensive. Graphene is still a laboratory curiosity. We are tethered to element number 29. Think about the sheer scale of this. We have smeared copper across the entire surface of the planet. Every wire, every motor, every coin, every transformer, it is all part of a massive geochemical redistribution.
Geologists studying the Anthropocene, the era of human impact, say that millions of years from now, our presence will be recorded in the rock strata as a copper layer. When our cities are gone and our records have turned to dust, a thin, greenish line will remain in the sedimentary rock. An observer in the distant future will see this anomaly and know that something lived here. Something extracted this metal from the depths, pulled it into wires thinner than a human hair, and used it to power a collective mind.
They will see that we built our world out of the ash of dead stars, and that we eventually choked on the very technology we created. Copper has been our skeleton, our currency, our weapon, and our voice. It has been the silent partner in our rise, and it may well be the architect of our limits. It sits in the darkness of the Atlantic, in the walls of your room, and in the ruins of ancient cities, slowly turning green, building its own armor of patina, and waiting.
It doesn't care about our quote 30 or our wars.
It is simply moving through its own geological cycle, and we are just a brief electric flicker in its long journey toward the silence of the stones. We often think of progress as a straight line, moving from the primitive past toward an increasingly complex future. But in the world of elements, especially when dealing with copper, time behaves more like a circle. There is a term in modern industry called the quote, 31 __. It refers to the fact that we no longer need to look only at the mountains of Chile or the pits of the Congo to find our resources. The greatest deposits of copper on the planet are now located within our own cities, buried in the walls of abandoned buildings, running through the guts of old machinery, and lying forgotten in the junk drawers of billions of people. Unlike plastic, which degrades and poisons the soil, or iron, which eventually turns to rust and vanishes, copper is effectively immortal. It is one of the few materials that can be recycled infinitely without any loss of quality. The atoms do not wear out. They do not get tired. Approximately 30 to 40% of the copper you encounter today is quote, 32 copper. This means that the specific atoms inside your smartphone's charging cable might have once been part of a Victorian telegraph line, a medieval church bell, or even a Roman water pipe. When you hold a piece of copper, you are holding a physical bridge across human history. The metal is simply being borrowed for a few decades before it moves on to its next form. However, this cycle of recycling is not enough to keep up with our hunger. As we discussed, the quote, 33 is the most copper-intensive project in human history. To meet the goals of the next 2 decades, we would need to mine more copper than humanity has extracted in the last 10,000 years combined. We are hitting a physical wall, and as the land-based mines become deeper and the ore becomes poorer, we are turning our eyes to the last untouched frontier, the deep ocean floor. At the bottom of the world's oceans, along the mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates pull apart, there are things called quote, 34 _. These are hydrothermal vents that spew mineral-rich water from the Earth's mantle into the freezing darkness of the abyss. As the hot water hits the cold ocean, minerals precipitate out, forming massive sulfide deposits rich in gold, zinc, and above all, copper. Mining companies are already testing underwater robotic harvesters, massive, remote-controlled machines designed to grind these deposits into slurry and pump them to the surface. But this solution creates a terrifying paradox. These vents are home to some of the most unique and fragile ecosystems on the planet, creatures that live without sunlight, fueled entirely by the chemical energy of the vents. By mining the copper we need to quote 35 from a climate crisis, we risk obliterating a branch of life we haven't even finished mapping. We are once again caught in the copper trap.
Our survival as a technological species seems to require the destruction of the very environment we are trying to protect. Even in our most advanced medical frontiers, copper remains a paradox. We return to the hospital, where the multi-billion-dollar fight against superbugs is being fought. In 2020, during the height of the global pandemic, a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine confirmed what the ancient Egyptians suspected. Copper is a viral executioner. While the SARS-CoV-2 virus could survive on plastic or stainless steel for days, it was inactivated on copper in less than 4 hours. Despite this, our hospitals are still filled with plastic and steel. We have the technology to make every doorknob, every bed rail, and every light switch an antimicrobial shield. Yet the cost and the inertia of our industrial systems prevent us from doing so.
We prefer to spend billions on new drugs rather than return to the red metal that has been protecting us for millennia. It is a reminder that human progress is often hindered by its own complexity. We search for the new and the advanced, while ignoring the fundamental solutions lying right in front of us. In the end, what is the legacy of element number 29? If we look millions of years into the future, long after the last human has spoken and the last city has been reclaimed by the forest, the Earth will carry our mark. Geologists of the far future will find a strange, thin layer in the rock, a spike in copper concentrations that doesn't match the natural background. They will see that for one brief, intense geological moment, the copper of the planet was gathered together, pulled into thin threads, and woven into a global web. This quote 39 will be our true monument. Not the pyramids, not the skyscrapers, and not our digital archives. Those will all turn to dust, but the copper will remain. It will be a green line of patina in the stone, a chemical memory of a species that learned to harness the electricity of the universe. We are the __quote_40__. We found a red stone in the dirt, and we used it to wrap the world in a nervous system of our own design. We have followed copper from the heart of a dying star to the depths of the ocean and the height of our satellites. It has been our weapon, our medicine, our currency, and our voice. And as we reach the limits of what this planet can provide, the metal remains indifferent. It doesn't care if we build a utopia or if we choke on our own ambition. It is simply a bridge of atoms, a conductor of energy that was here before us and will be here after we are gone. We are just a flicker in the life of the metal. We are the brief electric pulse running through the wire. And when that pulse finally fades, the wire will still be there, slowly turning green in the silence of the Earth, holding its quantum secrets and its star-born history until the sun itself begins to fade. This story of the red metal is just one of many deep dives into the hidden forces that shape our reality. If you found this journey valuable, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support the research that goes into these scripts. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Given the choice between ecological destruction and the copper we need for a green future, what is the right path? Or perhaps there is a third way we haven't discovered yet? Let's discuss it below. Thank you for watching.